So we are talking about the association with the duplication cyst. So as I said, it can be associated with small intestinal duplications, esophageal atresia, tracheoesophageal fistula, and also various pulmonary abnormalities, and also associated with pericardial defects. The embryology of the esophageal duplications is clearly not known, but there are several theories which are corresponding to it. And most accepted one is that the failure of the recanalization of the esophageal lumen during the 5th to 8th week of embryonic life, and split notochord theory. Coming to the clinical presentation of esophageal duplication cyst, it always depends upon the size of the cyst, the location of the cyst, and the type of mucosa which is lining the cyst wall. As I said, cervical is almost rare, and it can present with respiratory symptoms due to tracheal compression. And the most common symptoms are, one is dysphagia, and there can be symptoms which are secondary to acid production, because it can be lined by gastric mucosa in 1/3 of the cases. So it leads to acid production, and in turn, which it can lead to ulceration, perforation, bleeding, and also hematemesis or melena. And due to perforation, it can in turn lead to empyema or pneumothorax. So most of the duplication cysts are located in the distal esophagus, and they present with dysphagia and epigastric discomfort or retrosternal pain. And in some cases, it can cause compression of the carina or one branch of bronchus, and in turn, it can lead to hyperinflation of the opposite lung also. The diagnosis is always based on a plain chest X-ray, which shows a soft tissue mass lesion which is compressing or deviating the trachea or esophagus. It is more evident with an RT tube in situ. You can see the RT tube getting compressed and pushed to one side. And higher imaging, always MRI is preferred for a better soft tissue delineation than CT. Now, coming to the treatment part of esophageal duplication cyst, the main treatment modality is excision of the cyst. You can either do it via thoracotomy approach or with a thoracoscopic approach. Usually, the esophageal mucosa should be left intact. It should not be opened. So, an extramucosal resection should be done, and the rest of the musculature should be closed accordingly. Thoracotomy is always preferred over minimally invasive procedure in case of subcarinal cyst, because in that case, there can be compression of the bronchi, and there can be secondary hyperinflation of the opposite lung. And also, thoracotomy is preferred in case of infected cyst. If cyst cannot be excised completely, then at least the mucosa should be excised. And prognosis with excision is always excellent if surgery is done properly. Now, coming to the third topic, that is esophageal perforation. So, esophageal perforation, actually, Borhe was the first person to describe a spontaneous perforation of the esophagus in 18th century. And in case of, there's a difference between esophageal perforation topic in pediatrics and adult, because in 75% of the pediatric population, it is always iatrogenic. And most of the iatrogenic injuries occur during an endoscopy procedure in the older children, and with placement of naso or orogastric tubes and endotracheal tubes, or the use of even suction catheters in term infants. And incidence of perforation following an endoscopy is, following a plain diagnostic endoscopy, is coming up to 0.006%. But when you do a therapeutic intervention along with that endoscopy, the perforation risk increases to 0.6%. And various interventions in which there is chance for perforation. One is, most common one is a dilatation of a stenosaurus stricture, and second one is foreign body removal, and also in case of injection sclerotherapy for varices, because inordinate delivery of the sclerostin into the esophageal wall can cause ulceration, and also it can cause perforation. The presentation of esophageal perforation in children can be very vague and also non-specific, because in and non-specific, the type of presentation depends upon the location and also on the extent of the perforation. So early identification is the key for proper treatment of the perforation of esophagus. The various clinical presentations include child can present with dyspnea, chest pain, fever, vomiting, and also subcutaneous emphysema in the neck region. As you all know, Mackler's triad includes emesis, chest pain, and also presence of surgical emphysema, which is seen in esophageal perforation. And another sign which is correlated with the esophageal perforation is Hammond sign. In case of this mediastinal emphysema, when you auscultate the chest near the apex of the heart, you can hear a systolic crunch of the air which is in the mediastinum. So that is known as Hammond sign. So I told that depending upon the the location of the perforation, the clinical presentations can vary. In case of a cervical esophageal perforation which is contained, usually it goes into the retropharyngeal space because the cervical esophagus is almost like properly adherent to the prevertebral fascia, and so if any perforation occurs, it will be mostly a contained perforation into the retropharyngeal space. So in turn, it leads to a retropharyngeal abscess. So child can present with systemic symptoms, and in turn, on diagnostic evaluation, we find that child is having a retropharyngeal abscess. This is more common in case of improper use of suction catheters and NG tubes, and also during violent intubation methods. Diagnosis part, the workup should be expeditious because early diagnosis and management determines the prognosis of the patient, and also the type of therapy which we can provide to the patient. So always first you start off with a plain X-ray chest and neck. So in neonates, it might be shown by an abnormal position of the NG tube or a pleural effusion or even a pneumothorax. So this is one X-ray which is showing an abnormal position of the NG tube into the uh, pleural cavity. It is not in the esophagus; it has gone outside. So in case of older children, they can present with the pneumomediastinum, pleural effusions, pneumothoraces, even subcutaneous emphysema over neck, and also even pneumopericardium. But important thing to identify is that to understand is that almost 12 to 33% of the esophageal perforations initially they will be having a normal initial chest radiograph. So we must be cautious about this fact, and we shouldn't miss any perforations. So again, in the first X-ray also you can see that air is tracking into the superior mediastinal area. You can see air outside the esophageal region also. So these are the signs of esophageal perforations in the chest X-ray. Then second step towards diagnosis, always a contrast esophagogram. Preferably, we need to use a water-soluble contrast because barium can go into the mediastinum and can cause very bad mediastinitis. So water-soluble is always preferred over barium. And on an esophagogram, on a contrast study, you usually will see three abnormal patterns. One is, as I said, in case of cervical esophageal perforation, there can be a retropharyngeal collection as such, or else it can always go in a submucosal, it can happen as a submucosal perforation. It can track inside the esophagus also, but in a submucosal dissection manner. So it will be a contained type of perforation which is in submucosal plane. Third one will be a free perforation into the pleural space. So sometimes in case of very subtle perforations, you might miss subtle perforations if you use water-soluble contrast. In some papers, they have mentioned that in case of a negative study, in case of water-soluble contrast, you can consider a thin barium paste solo because in that case you can even identify subtle perforation which would have been missed by a water-soluble contrast. So the other higher modality for diagnosis is a CT thorax. So one importance of CT thorax is that in case of a perforation which is presented late, almost there will be intrathoracic collection. So CT helps in always defining and delineating the intrathoracic collection, and also helps in guiding for a percutaneous drain placement also, CT guided drain placement. Now, regarding the role for endoscopy in case of as a diagnostic tool, the use is always controversial because accuracy is very less. Almost it is ranging only up to 50%. And the bad thing is that it can, because of the air insufflation, it can worsen the size of the perforation also. So it is not usually advised. Now, another thing where endoscopy is like still useful is perforations which is occurring during dilatation. Like intraoperatively itself, if we are able to diagnose it, then you can immediately minimize the air insufflation and prevent worsening of the size of the perforation. Now coming to the treatment modality, various treatment modalities. So treatment as such, it depends on the type of perforation, whether it is a free type, of it is a free perforation or a contained perforation, or and also depending upon the site of perforation, the systemic response of the body towards the perforation, whether the child is in sepsis or whether the child is clinically stable. And fourth and the most important thing is time at presentation or the time at diagnosis. When the child presents to us with perforation and how early we can diagnose a perforation. So in case of spontaneous perforation, which is very rare in children, the contamination, because in case of spontaneous perforation, always the contamination will be more. So it requires rapid prior preparation and also intervention. Either a thoracotomy and if the size is small, we can always go for a thoracotomy and also a primary closure of the perforation. Or we can also assist the repair of the perforation with a patch. You can use a pleural or a pericardial patch, and this has to be done after proper irrigation of the pleural and the mediastinal space, because always there will be spill of the esophageal contents into the mediastinum and the pleural cavity, and there stands for sepsis. Here, sometimes you will find it difficult to identify the perforation once you do a thoracotomy, and in that case, there is always a good role for an on-table simultaneous endoscopy, which helps in identifying the site of perforation. Now, coming to free perforation following an instrumentation, if it is identified early during the time of procedure itself, there will always be less contamination. So, in that case, it is always amenable for a primary anastomosis or a primary repair. So always, in case of esophageal perforations, the primary repair can be strengthened by muscle flaps. Another important fact which we need to consider while we are doing a primary repair of esophageal perforation is that the main dictum is that the mucosal perforation will be having a higher length rather than the muscle perforation. Though the muscle perforation appears to be, suppose if it is appearing as a 1.5 centimeter defect, the inside mucosa would have been perforated for more than 3 centimeter or 4 centimeters. So always a longitudinal myotomy has to be done to make sure till what level or what is the extent of the mucosal perforation. Then you close the mucosal perforation and then come out and close the muscle once again in longitudinal fashion. So that mucosal perforation has to be delineated before closure, and this repair can be strengthened with a butters of a pedicle muscle flap. Usually, the most common muscle flap which we use is an intercostal flap. Intercostal flap is usually harvested because this. Decision to take a flap has to be made before you proceed for the surgery, because intercostal flap has to be harvested when you do the thoracotomy. At the time of thoracotomy itself, through the same space, you can harvest the intercostal pedicle muscle flap. So you need to separate the intercostal muscle from the lower border of the upper rib, and along with the neurovascular bundle from the upper border of the lower rib, and dissect it posteriorly as far as possible so that you will get an adequate length. And then you buttress the primary repair circumferentially with the muscle flap. I'll show a picture. So this is a picture which is showing an intercostal muscle flap. You can see that there is a perforation of the esophagus. Esophagus has been hooked out, and after closing the perforation with primary repair, you're buttressing the defect with a intercostal muscle flap, and it is sutured in a circumferential manner. Other flaps also can be used. The other available flaps are latissimus dorsi flap. Even sternomastoid are also being used. Then, in case of perforation, another modality which can be used is a esophageal stenting. It's now being commonly used in higher like where stenting facilities available. You can always stent for a smaller perforations, so that and then do a dye study so that we can confirm that dye is going into the stomach itself and not getting spilled out. In case of upper esophageal iatrogenic perforations, because I told that mostly it will be a retropharyngeal collection and it will be a content type of perforation. There is always predominance for a conservative management rather than doing a surgical intervention directly. So most of them can be managed conservatively. Now coming to the role of conservative management in pediatric and neonatal population for esophageal perforation. The main principles are minimizing the proximal flow of the contents, and also controlling the contamination, and also maintaining a distal downstream patency so that secretions won't get pulled and it will again aggravate the perforation. And also most important thing in that case is optimizing the clinical and nutritional status of the patient, because child will not be taking orally, so you will have to do a feeding procedure. Either a child has to be supplemented with a post-jejunal feed or a feeding jejunostomy. So if when to do primary surgery and when to do a conservative management always depends upon the type of perforation and the time of presentation. Acute injury which presents within 24 hours and with less contamination, always if amenable for primary repair is always better. rather than going for a conservative management, because studies are showing that with the conservative management, morbidity is always on the higher side. So if child presents early, and if the rupture is not severe, you can always go for a primary repair. Those presenting late and with intrathoracic collection and all, we need to drain the collection and see the progress of the patient. If with conservative management child is improving, then we can wait, and after 1 week we can repeat a dye study and see. And if still there is like, even there is if nutrition is well maintained, we can again wait for 1 more week, and after second week again we can repeat the dye study. If still leak is persistent, then we may have to intervene after stabilizing the primary condition of the child, the nutrition of the child. Or else, if child is sick, and if it is a high output fistula with a large perforation, we need to intervene immediately itself. Otherwise, in case of thoracic collections and all, with conservative management with multiple ICDs, it will come down, and eventually when the child's condition improves, it might spontaneously close off also. So this is a picture showing endoscopy and stenting of the esophageal perforation. So if conservative management fails, always the leak should be isolated. So in that case, we need to divert the esophagus. So a cervical esophagostomy can be done, and also we need to do a gastrostomy or a feeding jejunostomy to maintain the nutrition of the child. So most commonly, if you divert the esophagus, uh, it will eventually, in that case, the child might eventually require a esophageal replacement surgery at a later date. Now coming to the summary of the esophageal perforation, in case of spontaneous, always non-surgical management has shown increased mortality. So always we need to opt for a surgical management in case of spontaneous perforation, because contamination will be high. So immediately if we try to do a conservative management, child will have more morbidity. And cases which are diagnosed early and presenting within 24 hours, if amenable for primary repair, it should be done. And with a muscle flap buttress. Mucosal defect will be always bigger than muscle defect. So proper delineation is the key for a primary repair. And also late post strictures are common following esophageal repair, but they can be managed well with conservative therapy and dilatation. Non-surgical management is feasible for upper esophageal perforations, which are much systemic symptoms or sepsis. Thank you. Hello. Hello, sir.
Yes, Setu, a very nice presentation.
Sir.
I just have a few things. I think Dr. Savji will have a lot of things to say about it, because it is he's done a lot of work in this area. So I'll just say a few things, and then I will let Dr. Savji make his comments.
Yes, sir.
You have not mentioned about the caustic injury to the esophagus, which we encounter very commonly.
Yes, sir.
Which can also give rise to perforation of the esophagus. Okay.
Yes.
Second important thing you have not mentioned is the alkaline disc bacteria. Okay, which can lead to perforation of the esophagus, as also to tracheoesophageal fistula, acquired tracheoesophageal fistula.
Yes, sir.
Then prolonged intubation in centers where there is no expertise, and they usually intubate with big tubes and inflate the balloon, endotracheal tube, and
Yes.
that can give rise to perforation of the trachea as well as the esophagus with the tracheoesophageal fistula. So these are the things I have seen.
Yes.
And then generally I have found that if you have a patient with the a remnant which is causing congenital esophageal stenosis,
yes,
very often they will not respond to any treatment other than resection therapy. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And nowadays, with the advent of minimally invasive surgery and robotic surgery, minimally invasive surgery should be offered as a first step itself for these patients, those who have remnants.
Yes.
And for the esophageal duplication, there is nothing like a minimally invasive surgery for it. That's the best surgery. And as you said, in infection and all, we have to be very careful.
Yes, sir.
And then about management of the esophageal perforation, one of the most important advances we have done is in endoscopic treatment of that.
Yes, sir.
There are good stents available, in the sense that they are not esophageal stents. They are basically biliary stents.
Sir.
So basically, they are called as covered stents. So you cannot put a simple stent. The stent has to be covered. Otherwise, it won't work in the case of a perforation.
Perfect.
So adult stents we cannot use in a child. So you have to use biliary stents, which are meant for adult biliary perforations. So they are used for esophageal perforations in children. We have done it in 2 children in our experience, in my personal experience, where we use biliary stents, covered stents, and they have worked 100% result in both
Yes,
these
sir.
children. Okay. And as you said, if I have not seen any spontaneous perforation, I have seen with the caustic stricture delayed presentation, then with the instrumentation also delayed presentation, and both of these initially managed conservatively. In caustic stricture, we had to replace the esophagus. In case of this instrumentation perforation, luckily enough, the child survived after management conservatively. Now I would like Dr. Rajan Saudi to tell his experience with this very, very interesting topic of esophageal perforation and also these congenital and other esophageal stenosis.
Sir.
Yeah, thank you, Ram.
Thank you, sir.
Very good presentation. One important point, as far we go from last to first one. We start with perforations because that is a very wide and quite controversial area of management are there.
Sir.
Suggesting surgical intervention in much more cases. In fact, there is a paradigm shift to conservative management in esophageal perforations. And provided that situation that you have told certain principles, that is, there is no downstream obstruction, the contamination is well ensured, or tackling of contamination is well ensured, and nutrition can be tackled well, either by enteral or any tube method or parenteral nutrition. If these things are there, child is stable. Most of the time, esophageal perforation is managed conservatively. There is a paradigm shift
Yes, sir.
in this situation. That's number one. Number two, we must differentiate while presenting in children premature and neonatal.
Hello, sir.
And all these are another different type of overall management plan. In prematures and newborn babies, it's many times missed, and only sepsis and then subsequently pleural collection, hydropneumothorax or pneumopericardium is thought of. So these are the important issues in premature. For example, even a forceful passage of nasogastric tube or intubation can result into perforation of the esophagus. Third important point, cervical one is relatively safer and manageable because the advantage of investing layer of deep cervical fascia,
Yes, sir.
which prevents contamination of mediastinum and pleural cavity. And therefore, they fare pretty well
Yes, sir.
as far as it's concerned. Endoscopic management you have not covered. Use of through endoscope means TTSC, through the scope clips application, and over the OTSC, over the scope clip application. And
Yes,
there
sir.
are very specific indications. When the perforation is less than 10 millimeter, you can go and perforation less than 10 millimeter, the edges are not everted, and early diagnosis, you can usually, again, these are iatrogenic, so endoscopists would put in those through the scopes clips. If the perforation is 2 centimeter or more, then they would add over the scope clips, or they can use combination of both.
Yes, sir.
Scope and over the scope clips. Then that requires tremendous expertise, availability of clips and other things.
Yes, sir.
The third point in this situation is, what is instead of size 1 centimeter, 2 centimeter, 4 centimeter, 6 centimeter, what is more applicable and appreciable by everyone at all level, suppose if you describe, say, in terms of percentage of circumference of esophagus which is involved, say it is 30%, 40%, 60%, 70%.
Yes, sir.
Generally, if the perforation is somewhere more than 30% or up to 70%, the application of stent, fully covered stent, as Dr. Ramchandra has told, is and in another situation, partially covered stent. Again, those biliary stents are oftenly used. Though these stents are available esophageal stent, but they are extremely costly and not very used. Very few selected centers are using other stents dedicated to esophagus. Most of the people are using these biliary stents. And then there are certain prognostic indicators. Say, for example, good prognosis of a perforation is obviously one is time within 24 hours. Secondly, if it is iatrogenic.
Yes, sir.
Third, if there is some underlying esophageal disease like stricture,
Yes,
etc.
sir.
Fourth, nutrition is good. There is no systemic major response of a patient. These are certain prognostic indicators which will tell you, and if it is due to foreign body, if it is a sharp foreign body.
Yes, sir.
So generally, these are towards better prognosis. If the foreign body is irregular, blunt, it can lead to really very bad tearing of the esophagus, and ultimately it will land up into dissociation and subsequently replacement of the esophagus. So that is one point I thought I would highlight there. In newborns and prematures, a reasonable number I've seen because of from small peripheral centers where everywhere people are attempting resuscitation and there are facilities available. Certain procedures which are carried out very diligently are not carried out. They are coming with perforation. The problem of perforation in premature newborn can be totally missed because presentation, number one, as I told you, would be not very major, like pain and all are not perceptible by children much, and we can identify that way. So unless blown out sepsis or massive respiratory distress which develops as a result of collection is difficult.
Yes,
The immediate sign of any repetitive or multiple attempts of nasogastric tube placement, oral suction, endotracheal tube placement, laryngoscope blade placement. If such history is available, and baby comes to you with drooling of saliva.
Yes, sir.
And blood tinge saliva, that gives you an indicator that possibly there is some injury somewhere to the esophagus.
Yes,
usually they are superior to the upper finger in that region, but that is the one area. So what generally one tries to do is to hyperextend the neck and try to put in the tube, any tube. One should should avoid all this situation because at say around C6, 7, that level, the vertebral bodies against which the posterior esophageal wall will be very snugly or sort of in close contact there. So any force there can easily damage mucosa, and further rough manipulation can lead into pseudo-diverticular formation or flap, etc. And they can be easily confused with esophageal atresia. Even if you do contrast study, contrast will not go down.
Yes, sir.
To that extent, some of the cricopharynx will occur. So you have to go really high index of suspicion, past history. I mean, you get the history of repeated attempts of some inhibition there, etc. So this is a very major difference in older child in a smaller baby. Then of course, downhill course is very fast and the mortality is very high in prematures and newborn babies. So this is regarding perforation.
Sir.
Regarding esophageal duplications, I think you have not mentioned about ultrasound guided endo-US. You spoke, I think, contrast X-ray and CT scan. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Endo-US is another very good reality. Again, of course, you require skill and availability for that. And sometimes when there is obstruction of the air passages, you can aspirate that before subjecting patients for thoracoscopic management. I have experienced at least 2 such cases where cyst is on the right side or in the carinal region, hyperinflation is on the left side.
sir.
So if you go from the right side, like modified prone position and entry from the right side, because it will be isolated. Left side there is already hyperinflation, therefore hypoxia is there. So such patient don't tolerate. So immediately you will see hypoxia, hypercarbia on the thing. Second mistake one can do is somewhere renal region. You might enter from the left side, and you will not reach at least, because you'll see hyperinflation or change on the left side, cyst is at the carina. So therefore I'll go from the left side. So that will not be helpful. So in such situation, aspiration, trans endoscopic aspiration with US guided is again very helpful
Yes.
in applications.
Sir,
Similar,
sir, the meeting will end in 2 minutes. In that case, I will restart the meeting again, sir.
yeah, start.
Sir, sometimes
Stop
it
here.
might. Yeah, no, sir. It will end in 2 minutes. Then I will restart the meeting once again, sir.
Okay, okay.
Because only 45 minutes interval is there. That is why.
Another cause for intervention, perforation is these recently adopted endoscopic management of various procedures like leiomyoma, duplication is achalasia cardia by endoscopist. And during that procedure, there is possibility of perforation of the esophagus. So one of the etiological or indication, causes of esophageal perforation in the current era is this also the procedure carried out by endoscopists, therapeutic procedure carried out, other than dilatations and other procedures.